Welcome to the Simple Talk podcast on YouTube. So I should say Simple Talk YouTube. This is a rare addendum or a bit of a preamble to the podcast. After I reflected on this, I realized this is a father-son podcast and a lot of the talk between me and Wayne and our relationship and my influence. But I thought it was really important that I do acknowledge that, of course, Lizzie played a significant role, not only in Wayne's upbringing, but in his faith. In particular, when he was reborn, Lizzie was always asking the right questions. She was always there standing beside him. She was always there walking with him. And of course, as we were bringing our kids up, we did this together. So as couples out there, I want you to remember that this was a joint effort together. We would both always be in the blue chairs. We would be in our Bible modeling for Wayne. So I just didn't want that to go unsaid as I reflected on the podcast. It could go without saying, but I'm going to say it because I think it is well worth acknowledging. Of course, Wayne has two siblings, Charlotte and Amelia, that he is super close with, and they've all been influential on each other's walk as they question faith and they talk together about it. So again, I can't really say it enough how important Lizzie was to this walk, especially as a mom, how she spoke into Wayne, and especially now as he navigates dating as a young Christian man. So with that, I just wanted to make that acknowledgement. I really hope y'all enjoy this special podcast, and I want you to keep looking up. We're just going to pick right up where we left off. So I'd encourage you at least go catch the end of the other one. I started a new Simple Talk tradition, which is the previous guest leaving a question for the next guest. Of course, the comedy of this is I said, this won't work if I have you back, and now I'm having you back. So Wayne Jr., left himself a question, which I will leave to the next guest, but I'm going to ask you for a new one at the end of this podcast. So, who is your favorite president and why?
Yeah, this one is very easy.
And will you answer this real quick? Why is that a question you love?
Well, I guess maybe first to say this, it's a pretty easy question to come up with on the fly. But outside of that, I think it's because history matters. History is important. And I think it's important to understand what are the foundations, for example, with this president question, what is the foundations of our country? How did we get from there to where we are now, or what took us from the beginning of our country to where we are now? And what were the big turning points in the development of our country, and what has made it so great throughout its history? And I think there's no bigger historical data point that we can look at regarding that than presidents. And so I think it's fun, and I like history. I'm no history buff or anything, but I do enjoy history as a history major for about one semester of my school year before I dropped out of it. But I got to study Abraham Lincoln a lot my freshman year of college. And I definitely, and that's my answer, by the way, is Abraham Lincoln. I fell in love with him as a president. And then since becoming a Christian, that's actually only increased my enamor for him as a president. And I mean, there's so much that you can address, but I'd say maybe the chief point as to why I'm so appreciative and fond of his presidency is because I think he encapsulated a moment in which we got to see the biblical ethics and worldview flourish in American society, because much, if not all, of American politics and the rights in which this country are founded upon are built upon not just natural theology, but upon biblical theology. And I think we see that emerge to possibly its greatest extent in what Lincoln did with the abolition of slavery, right? If we go towards the beginning of the war between the North and the South, the abolition of slavery was more of a political ploy. Abraham Lincoln was seeking to abolish slavery, not necessarily because of his ethical concerns, but for the sake of the preservation of the unity and the reconciliation of the North and South. But as the war continued and as the North really began to struggle throughout the war, and it seemed like defeat might be imminent, that crisis brought clarity to Lincoln. And it brought clarity that the abolition of slavery and the preservation of universal human rights, irrespective of your race, should not just be viewed as a political tool, but as the preservation and continuation of a special moral principle that's found within the scriptures and on which our country is founded, right? That all people are created equal before God. And so whether Lincoln was truly a Christian or not is up for debate. But what is not up for debate is that he was heavily influenced by the biblical worldview and by the biblical ethic. So I just think it's a beautiful mark in history where we got to see how biblical teachings, which have been around for thousands of years, got to shape a historical event that occurred within our nation only 150 years ago or so. And so I'd say that's probably the chief reason why. And then there's other small reasons. I mean, he was an incredible orator. He had incredible speaking skills. His ability to present these incredibly concise, yet powerful and straightforward, not even necessarily polemics, but just addresses to the issues that the country is facing is beautiful, because much of modern politics is very polemical or it's very rhetorical and it doesn't actually say or do anything. And Lincoln was the antithesis of that. And so there's just quality after quality after quality of who Lincoln was and what he accomplished that not only make him my favorite president, but might objectively be the greatest president of all time.
I love it. So what, now we're going to have to camp out on this for a bit rather than just leave the question. And that's a really good answer. And I'm in line with you. For me, Lincoln would just have to be the guy. The hard part about giving that answer, it seems to be such an easy answer, but I'm not sure every American would pick it. So, but why do you think his faith is in question, or is that's questionable?
It's just uncertain whether he truly personally embraced a relationship with Jesus Christ, because earlier in his life, he expressed kind of concerns or doubts he had about the faith, and he studied the scriptures thoroughly. There's just not this clear expression of a genuine repentant heart, or not even repentant heart, but a genuine just love for and relationship with Jesus Christ. Maybe some later presidents presented. So that's kind of why the concern. He might have been, I don't know, but it is undeniable that his politics and his own personal ethic were absolutely shaped by the biblical worldview.
Do you know why I love Lincoln?
Why?
Because he never gave up.
Yeah.
And I'm about to read you some stuff about President Lincoln. By the way, if you're a listener out there and you haven't seen Lincoln the movie, and you may not have even watched it, it is one of the best films of all time, Steven Spielberg, and it's Daniel Day-Lewis, which was one of his last films, one of the greatest actors of a decade, if not generations, portrays him, and it is absolutely astonishing. And one thing that's encouraging, if we think America is on the breaking point now, well, it was on the breaking point. It broke.
Yeah.
Right? So it's encouraging. So Lincoln, and a lot of y'all out there may know this, and this is, again, why I love Churchill. And Churchill and Lincoln have a lot of commonality if you watch the way they spoke. And then you often wonder, was Lincoln, I think everything's providential. So God had him at that moment, at that time, right? It was just without question, because the devil, or there was so many things to knock him off that path throughout his life. So, and this is all factual and historical. In 1832, he failed 2 businesses in New Salem, became bankrupt, and took 17 years to pay off his debt. He was a miserable politician, as you may or may not know. He didn't look the part. He was tall and gangly, and so defeated his first run for the Illinois State Legislature in 1832, defeated for Speaker of the Illinois House in 1838, failed to get the nomination for U.S. Congress in 1843, lost for nomination for Congress in 1848, rejected for federal land officer in 1849, defeated in U.S. Senate bids in 54 and 58, lost the nomination for the vice president in 1856. Mm-hmm. Then, with where I stand personally on mental health, it was a very, very massive struggle for him. You may or may not know that. So his sweetheart, Anne Rutledge, died in 1835, which caused him severe grief. 1836, he fell into a depression that became a full nervous breakdown, to which he had to isolate for months because he couldn't function. He struggled with the bankruptcy over for a decade. And then, famous, his Mary Todd, his wife, suffered severe mental illness. And it was unclear to me what you would categorize it now as borderline schizophrenic and or bipolar. And if I remember correctly, I believe he lost a son along in there as well.
I believe so.
So, all that's before he even got to be president. But he never gave up. And that's where I think I believe this. God is always taking us in the right direction if we'll let him. Right. So we look at it, we get a red door and we end up camping out on that red door. But there's a yellow door right over here just waiting for us to open it. And so that's why I encourage people, you just keep going no matter what. So thank you for that. Mm-hmm. We'll find out. We'll give another question for the next guest. I do love history. Okay, so let's go back to the last podcast. We unpacked a whole lot about your faith walk, how you were born again or rededicated your life to Christ. And I say it that way because you were a Christian, whatever that means. But you definitely gave yourself back to Christ right there in that garage, down below us. So you do that, you go back to school. We talked about, you abstain from drinking, clearly quit smoking pot, and began to walk a path. And then we stopped. So what does the 2 years look like from then? And give people actual historical context on kind of general dates or years.
Yeah. I'll definitely try to keep this brief because we're trying to keep this in an hour. But I'll try to hit the major points. So, yeah, I guess I get this born-again experience. The scales fall from my eyes. And the first thing that comes to mind is, okay, I'm about to go to Austin. I need a church. I don't have any local church. Well, lucky for me, while I was in this process of kind of exploring Christianity earlier into the second semester of my freshman year, so this is around March of freshman year, come across these people on campus. They stop me and they say, hey, can we talk with you real quick? And I'm like, no, I don't got time to talk. I got to go to class. I'm going to be late. And they're really repressing. Like, you know what, fine. Okay, what do y'all got to say? Basically asked me, where are you with your faith in Jesus? So I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Like, that's kind of weird because I actually just started re-exploring this. So I thought that was a weird coincidence. I get their numbers. They reach out to me a couple times, totally ghost them. They get me connected with this guy on campus with my former campus ministry. And he texts me a couple times. I ghost him as well. Because I'm like, I don't want anything to do with these guys. I don't need these people. Like, I can figure this out on my own. Well, I get born again. I'm like, crap. Well, I should reach out to that guy who's reaching out to me, who runs this campus ministry on campus, and get plugged in. Because I need A, a church, and B, a group of Christians to be with this summer. So I reached out to him. Then he gets me connected with his campus ministry. And they, for the summer, have a Zoom that's going on. So I get plugged into the Zoom, and this is how I begin to meet some people in the summer, right? I got to occasionally hang out with them during the summer, but for the most part, we're meeting over Zoom. But everyone did go to UT. And at the same time, I'm now living at the house in Austin. And of course, no one's expecting for me to come to Austin and live at the house and be this person who I am now, right? This born-again Christian who's pursuing the repentance of sins. No one's expecting that because they've never known that Wayne, because I had just become that Wayne only a month prior. So when I do get to the house and, my friends are asking me to, let's go do this, let's go do that, and I'm abstaining from it, they're very confused. And of course I have to give a reason because they don't understand why I'm doing this. And so the first reasons I give to them are just health issues. So I don't want to go smoke because, I have asthma and it's not good for it. I didn't want to present to them the real reason why I'm abstaining from these different bad habits. Until eventually I just felt compelled that I had to. Like, I knew I was not truly witnessing the grace of Christ if I did not demonstrate that it was the grace of Christ that transformed me. And I think that really began to take a turn around towards the end of June. A ton of people coming down for our bid day party, right? Where we hand out all our bids and we get our new pledge class for each year. So a ton of people are coming in town for this party. It's at the house. I'm living there. So I see all my friends that I haven't seen since the school year. The same questions coming up. Wayne, what were you doing? Were you smoking? Are you high? Do you want to go smoke, et cetera, et cetera? And I'm just like, I don't do that anymore. And they're like, why? I'm like, it's because of my faith. It's because of Jesus Christ. And everyone's just like, what? Like, what are you talking about? And they're very confused because that is not the Wayne that they talked to, only a month, 2 months beforehand. And so that gave me an exceeding boldness because my expectation was people were going to think, oh, this is extremely weird. Like, why would you do this, et cetera, et cetera. But instead of disrespect or becoming a laughingstock and ostracized, I actually gained everyone's respect for this decision. And that was kind of the turning point for me to think, okay, wait, God might actually be doing something here because I'm expected to get persecuted and suffer, but I'm actually gaining respect and praise from these people for these changes. Like, God, what is going on? And then God continues to work. And then I start to think, man, I'm being more open about my faith and I'm demonstrating clearly why I'm living this different, sanctified, set apart life. But I know there's something else I could be doing. And then my grandma, mama, your mother, presented me to start a Bible study. And of course I think, oh yeah, like for sure I'll do this. And in my head, I'm telling myself, there's no way this is going to happen. A, who would ever come listen to me to speak or teach? And B, no one would ever come anyways. No one's interested. This is the SAE house. We don't do Bible studies. That's not how this works. But that seed was planted, and very quickly that seed grew, and I realized that's what I needed to do. I was extremely hesitant at first, but eventually I just had to concede and say, okay, God, I'm not comfortable with this at all, and I do not want to do this. I do not want to do this, but I know you really want me to. And so I have to be obedient to your call. And so I decided to start the Bible study. And to my surprise, people were very interested. People came, and it's nothing crazy because there are not that many people living at the house in my grade that summer. So maybe 20 people at the house. You maybe get like 5 people come on average around there. But even that was a sign to me that there's something really happening here. My expectations are being heavily exceeded. God is doing far beyond what I was expecting him to do here. So maybe there's something special really happening. So that summer, of course, was still a struggle trying to figure out how do I live this sanctified life, but immerse myself in this environment. And to an extent, it's not possible, but I try to do it to the extent that I could with the little experience of walking in the faith that I had. And I kept the Bible study going. And my buddy, William White, close friend of mine, he too became born again right around the same time as me. So we got to kind of walk through the struggle together and walk through the Bible study together. Fast forward to the beginning of junior year of college, and I'm still in the same campus ministry, and that's where I'm being fed and discipled and grown. And of course, I decided to continue the Bible study during the school year. And that's when I get it, and we get maybe like 20 people to come. And I was like, what is this? Like, this is crazy. Because we have so many more people in town now because school started and people are really starting to come. But the cool part is that the work of Christ was not just restrained to that Bible study, but the mere introduction of, hey, let's pursue after the faith. The mere thought of that being a possibility in people's minds planted seeds left and right to open up conversations with people, even if they never made their way to Bible study, which was a cool experience, which was a very cool experience and a great blessing because it meant that me and my friends can now begin to work with people, really try to draw them into Christ outside of the constraints of the Bible study. And then my friend Rhett Hales, who just recently graduated, he decided to start a freshman study and then brought on me and my friend Charlie Baird to help lead that freshman study. So very quickly, junior year is painting out to be a very special year. We have this new sophomore study that just started, a new freshman study that just started. And to my knowledge, we haven't had an in-house Bible study in a very long time. And I don't know if we've ever had two in-house Bible studies led solely by people within the house that are actually pursuing the Lord. So this was a really unique and special development. And very quickly, we're seeing leaders be brought up. We have me with my sophomore study, William rising up as a leader in the study, my other buddy, Corbin Gunner, rising up as a leader within the study. The freshman study, we had Rhett, who started it, me and Charlie, who were brought on, Luke Johnson, who was brought on later. So very quickly, not only are we seeing the seeds of Christ being planted and conversations start, but we're seeing actual leaders of Christ within the fraternity be raised up as well. And so this was a big encouragement, not just that first semester, but really throughout all of junior year to notice and to witness that God is really doing something with us, and he's really doing something here in a way that I don't know that he has before. That being said, junior year was still not without its struggles because I was so new to the faith and trying to walk this radically sanctified life in an environment that's completely contrary to the life I want to live. And so it was a struggle to figure out how do I balance being in these environments and these social settings while also trying to preserve my sanctity. And I didn't do it perfectly. There's things that I could have done differently here or there. It wasn't without its struggle. And I think that's important to note because as we mentioned last podcast, this walk is going to come with sacrifice. And often I had to make sacrifices that were uncomfortable and that caused negative consequences in my life. But of course, those sacrifices are necessary. And while they may not be temporally fruit-bearing, they certainly will be fruit-bearing in heaven. And so that was the only thing just kind of keeping me going, especially because even though I had this community in my prior campus ministry, I didn't really feel like I had a real sense of community. Like I had people that I go to. I had a campus night, I had a campus minister, and I was going to church, but I didn't really have a real sense of community. And coming out of this born-again experience, I was just hyper anti-institutional. I was really skeptical of the church, and I was really skeptical of religion, and I was big on this, it's not a religion, it's a relationship type thing. all this very modern individualistic Christianity things. That was kind of the wave I was going on because of how anti-institutional I was. Seeing that I grew up in the church, but I lost my faith, and so that kind of led me to think there must be something wrong with the church, especially when you look around and you see all these mega churches and how corrupt they are. And so that caused a real great grief in me during the first semester of junior year because I really lacked community, even though I kind of had community. Going into second semester junior year, decided to get plugged in more, got plugged into my former church, actually became a member, got more plugged into my campus ministry, and just sought to develop more new relationships. Because throughout the first semester junior year, I was getting coffee with people often, and a ton of people were hearing my testimony, and just really great conversations I was having with people. But I didn't, as often I was having really good conversations and developing new friendships, I wasn't necessarily developing a community. And that's what I needed to develop. Because I knew when I began to realize, like, I'm just going to fall and fall and fall and have no possible way of getting back up if I remain in this walk with Christ alone, even though there are kind of people adjacent to me. But I need people that were just adjacent to me, but actually walking alongside me. So going to second semester junior year, start to develop new community, get my two friends, William and Corbin, to actually be rotational leaders within the sophomore Bible study with me to take some burden off myself. And I began to see a lot of really good fruit growing. And another thing I forgot to mention is during the first semester of my junior year, started doing like a one-on-one discipleship with a friend. And I decided to do the same kind of discipleship, but with 4 of my friends using this app called the One-to-One. And kind of just kept this process of having the Bible studies and rotating leaders and having my own personal discipleship with people and cultivating community. And I began to see myself grow more and more into Christ and find less and less of this burden falling on me because I had more people surrounding me. At the same time, I began meeting more with this RUF campus pastor named Ryan Dugan, a person I've formed a relationship with back in the fall because of the freshman study. And so RUF is a campus ministry at UT. And my friend Rhett was a part of RUF, so he had Ryan come teach our freshman Bible study in the first semester. That's how I got to know Ryan. And so we're meeting in the second semester, and theology has always been interesting to me. I've always just loved knowledge. I've loved learning, whether it's been in politics or philosophy, whatever it is. Now I'm into theology, so I love studying theology. Remember, I confront Ryan with some of my theological concerns, in particular about predestination. That had been a big issue for me in the past, so I confront him about this issue of predestination, and he essentially just takes me to school. And my mind is completely blown. And I'm like, wow, I had this completely wrong idea of predestination, right? Because the common conception of predestination, many people hold this. I'm not saying, I personally think this is wrong. I could be wrong, but this was just my prior perception of it, which is predestination exists insofar as God's foreknowledge. That God foresees things happening. He foresees our free will choice of him. And therefore, that's how predestination occurs. And then I understand Romans 9, and I read Romans 9, and Ryan presents that to me. And then the cumulative case of that, I begin to realize, wait, God's sovereignty is more at work here than just our own personal choice. But he's actually shaping people. He's actually choosing people to be his elect, right? Because we're totally depraved, because we actually are dead in our sin and we are not alive, we cannot choose God. We need God to choose us first so that we can choose him back. And this set me on this path of learning about what's called Reformed theology. And so just give a quick explanation. I'm not referring to Reformed theology as in like the broad theology that came out the Reformation, right? So that's like grace alone, faith alone, Christ alone, scriptures alone, to God's glory alone. I'm not talking about that broad Reformed theology. I'm talking about the specific Reformed theology that was developed by John Calvin and kind of Zwingli. Then that was brought by John Knox over to Scotland to establish Presbyterianism, and another dude to establish Dutch Reform. I'm talking about that specific form of Reformed theology is what I began to dip my toes into. And it took me a really long time to come to terms with, but through reading more of the scriptures and actually understanding the cumulative case, I began to realize that this Reformed theology is the right theological perspective on how to read the scriptures. And this isn't just Romans 9. Once you have this mindset and you understand this, you begin to see it everywhere throughout the scriptures, both New Testament and Old Testament. And so then I begin to think, okay, how does this Reformed theology shape how I relate to God? So I'm going to study Reformed theology more and more and more. And of course, it also begins to impact how am I teaching? You know, how am I even evangelizing and ministering to people? Because if people's choice of salvation, if their salvation is dependent upon themselves and you articulating the gospel to them, because it's not a sole work of God's sovereignty, but it's a work of you presenting it to them and them receiving it, that's a heavy burden on you. Because what happens if you misrepresent the gospel or you don't tell it properly? Or maybe you act in wrong behavior and you live out the gospel wrongly. Well, it's your fault that person isn't a Christian. What if the person just isn't very smart and they struggle to comprehend and understand what the gospel says? Well, it looks like they're screwed because it's up to our mental faculties to accept the gospel. Or what if, according to Reformed soteriology, this big word for theology of salvation, it's up to God to soften someone's heart to receive the gospel? Well, then that gives you the spirit of calmness, of peace. You don't need to be anxious, but you can know even if you give the worst presentation of the gospel, because God is sovereign over our hearts and is the one who softens our hearts to receive it, God will work even with my terrible presentation of the gospel to change this person's heart unto salvation. What if I don't think this person's going to be able to understand what I'm talking about? Well, I can trust in God's sovereign work to soften that person's heart to receive the gospel. So this gave me a real calm and a real peace in my evangelistic efforts to bring in the gospel within SAE, to bring it to my friends to make known Christ, because I understood the burden is not on me to present this as best as possible, nor is it even necessarily on them to perfectly understand what I'm saying. I'm just going to plant the seed and water it and then allow God to bring forth the fruit. And so that began to shape a lot of my evangelistic efforts throughout second semester, junior year, but of course, especially going into senior year. And so then junior year ends, keep doing the Bible studies. Christ continues to spread. We have our first ever worship night with Bucks at the house, which was a really good success. Really cool just to be able to worship God and have a sermon on the basketball court of the SAE house, which I don't think has ever occurred in the history of Texas SAE. It could be wrong. That was an incredible experience. And very quickly over this one school year of my sophomore year of college, I went from going into it thinking about to be persecuted and ostracized and lose all my friends to actually developing the respect of my peers and the credibility to spread Christ within SAE and actually see people begin to respond to the gospel message. So that's kind of the broad brush story of my sophomore year. Of course, even more occurred both personally, theologically, and through what was happening at SAE throughout junior year. But maybe we can put a pin right there. And that's kind of the story of what my first year of walking with Christ looked like in SAE and in college.
So do we need to go to year 2 next? Or
yeah, year 2 is next.
Okay. So let me interject a few things. One, it's a beautiful thing. 2, it's so neat that you had, you found guys to walk along with you, and how RUF came into your life, having William White and some people that you were able to walk with. Remember y'all did the retreat at the Hunting Fishing Club. Where in there, and listeners, this is pretty interesting. I asked Wayne to lead the men's group, my men's group, and you were very uncomfortable, but were very brave to do it. And that was early. Was that year 1? I think it was.
Talking about the first time ever?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I forgot to mention those because I got to lead your men's group just about exactly 2 years ago from today.
Yeah.
So before I even got into school. And then that same summer, about 2 months later, got to do it again. And then, of course, I guess I forgot to mention leading your Sunday school class as well. Yeah, I led our class a couple times.
And I bring that up because I remember asking you, and you basically were tentative to a bit of a no. And all I said, and I encourage this to all you as well, I mean, you have to begin to tell your testimony. It's what we do as Christians, right? So you just have to get comfortable. And I always encourage you, and it's my favorite quote of all time, which is get comfortable with being uncomfortable. So it's easier and it becomes enjoyable, but it's never really easy just to get up and give your testimony or talk to somebody about it. So that was, to me, a real maturation to see one grow as a teacher, but to put yourself out there publicly, even with my men's group, which is talking to a bunch of 50-year-old men. And it was incredibly well received. Okay. So, and I want to go, I'll actually circle back to this at the end. You are chaplain now of the house, which is pretty cool because I think that role has existed off and on over the years, but it didn't mean anything. So you've given real substance to that. So yeah, now let's get into year two, which is your junior year building up to today.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think we hit this, but Wayne's a rising senior. I think most people figured that out by now. But
yeah. To touch a bit on the summer going into my junior year. So I just finished my junior year. So this is my most recent school year. There was only one really, the summer was honestly a good rest period and not much happened, which I was very enjoyable of. I'd say one of the first and only major developments of the summer was beginning to talk to who is now my current girlfriend. We'd been friends for a while, but now that she was transferred from Arkansas and coming to UT and coming to Austin, decided to take things more seriously. Within the first school week of junior year, that Thursday, August 28th, we started dating. We've been dating for now 8.5 months, close to 9 months. So that was one major development because I've never really had a girlfriend. You have those childhood girlfriends, but never had a real girlfriend. So this is my first real girlfriend. So this is going to be a really big opportunity for me to, one, learn how to have a girlfriend, period, but then also learn how to manage a girlfriend within a Christian context. Those are two big learning curves that I was going to have to develop, which I am still developing, but have definitely matured, I think, a lot throughout the process. That was one big development. Also, very early on into my junior year, I continued attending my former campus ministry, and something just fell off. And I just couldn't quite put a pin on it. And I began to reflect on RUF. And as I mentioned, my theology was beginning to change a lot. I was becoming much more reformed in my theology. I just realized I needed something else. I remember I was meeting with Ryan Dugan, and I was asking him, I was telling him these things and what was kind of going through my mind. And then he told me something that I can never forget, and I mention it all the time, and people think it's funny, but it was just transformational. And he goes, and he mentions the Westminster Confession, Shorter Catechism 1. And for those of y'all who don't know, the Westminster Confession is the official confessional document for the Presbyterian Church. So within the confession, they have this thing called the Shorter Catechism. It was for children to study because it's easier to learn than the longer catechism. And it's a series of questions and answers, basically, to simplify an understanding of what is the Christian faith according to the Reformed person, according to the Presbyterian. In Westminster Confession, Shorter Catechism 1 says, man's chief end is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. I was like, that's it. That's what I'm missing. Right now, that does not feel like my chief end. That feels secondary to me making disciples for Christ, to performing to Christ, for even bearing fruit for Christ. And all those things are incredibly important. But what does Christ say? In John 15, he says, abide in me, and then you shall bear much fruit. So what comes first, the bearing much fruit or the abiding? It's the abiding. And I realize that's what it means to glorify God and enjoy him, is that we abide in Christ. But I'd put too much emphasis on the fruit production and not enough emphasis on the simply abiding in him. I realized that's exactly what I was missing. And of course, I realized this is because it's a theological issue, which then drives philosophy of ministry. And I began to just fall in love with RUF, which stands for Reformed University Fellowship. So it's built on Reformed theology. It's a Presbyterian ministry. I'm going to fall in love with their theology. And then, of course, the effects that had on their philosophy of ministry. That they're not viewing us as tools, as means to an end, right? They're not seeing, what can you do for us? What are the disciples that you can produce for us or for Christ? They're not asking, when you sit down with them, what are you doing? They're asking you, how are you doing? And that was huge, because I feel like I'd lacked an experience of that, yet I experienced it time after time after time meeting with Ryan. And I was like, this is exactly what I need right now. And so I decided to jump ship, go over to RUF. It really felt like I was breaking up with a girlfriend. It was honestly very hard on me, even though I remember. It's kind of stupid in hindsight, but it was really hard for me to do. I just said, I think this is where the Lord is leading me and I have to go. Jump ship to RUF. One of the best decisions I've ever made. And so throughout the fall semester, I began to get more immersed in RUF, and I joined Servants Team, which is where you just help serve with the ministry. And it was so fun because I'm finally in a ministry where I get to learn about Christ and learn how to grow in Christ and walk with Christ alongside some of my hometown best friends and alongside all my pledge brothers, because RUF was heavily Greek life. And I'm like, I need a community of believers who are in this same arena as me, because this walk with Christ in Greek life is unique. And I need people who are in that same arena that I can learn from and help and have them help learn from me, hopefully, Lord willing. And that began to bear so much fruit in my walk with Christ. And in learning more about Reformed theology and just studying under Ryan and his Bible study and campus nights on Wednesdays where he would preach, I began just to grow more in Christ and just find sustenance in him and fall in love with the ordinary. Because so often, I think within the broad Christian evangelical sphere, we want to seek the extraordinary. And that's not necessarily wrong. Mm-hmm. The issue is we're seeking the extraordinary as though it is normative. But the whole point of calling it extraordinary is that it's non-normative. If the extraordinary, or what we call the extraordinary, was normative, then would it be called the extraordinary? It'd be called the ordinary, right? And so I began to think, this walk with Christ, this daily walk with Christ, is very ordinary. It's rarely hyper emotional. It's rarely you rarely accrue these great feats for Christ on a daily basis. Even your church experience, your campus ministry experience, it's typically an ordinary experience. And I'm beginning to think, I need to pursue after that. Because if I'm seeking too often these extraordinary means or these extraordinary experiences of Christ, I'm going to find myself in a real drought on a Tuesday at noon when I'm thinking, where's the extraordinary? I can't find it. And therefore, I can't find you, God. And so the goal is to find Christ, to find God in the ordinary means of grace. And then if the Spirit sovereignly permits an extraordinary experience, it makes it all the more sweeter and that you know it's real. So that begin to shape how I view things like worship, how I view things like liturgy, that my church experience, my campus ministry experience should not be seeking to produce this profound emotional effect, because that's not properly reflective of the daily walk with Christ, but should seek to provide an ordinary, sustainable experience of Christ that's steeped in truth, that's steeped in beauty, that's steeped in order, that's steeped in reverence, because that's what our daily walk with Christ is. And then what I've found in that immersing myself in those ordinary means, there have been times when the Spirit has sovereignly permitted this overjoyous emotional experience of Christ through an ordinary means, and it has made it all the more beautiful, and yet not left me feeling drained coming out of it, or craving for it like you crave for a drug, like you're on ecstasy or something like that. And of course, these ordinary means, they're things like prayer, they're things like the scriptures, they're things like communion. And what is the place in which you can experience all these ordinary means of grace together? It's at church. So I'm like, okay, well, now I'm seeing church differently, because church provides me all the ordinary means of grace that I need. And so I went from being this very anti-institutional, almost anti-church Christian, to being this very pro-church Christian, where Christ truly works in the prayer of the church, truly works in liturgy, truly works in the scriptures, truly works in the communion that I'm receiving, right? So often you read from the reformers, especially those that lean more toward Reformed and Calvinists, and they'll say that in communion, in the Eucharist, we are truly feeding on the body and blood of Christ, yet not corporeally, but spiritually, right? Because the Roman Catholic or the Eastern Orthodox, they believe that the body and blood of Christ is literally present within the bread and wine, that it literally transforms into the body and blood of Christ. And so the reformers, seeking to sustain a high view of the Eucharist, but not fall into what they thought was an erroneous belief of it, realized that Christ is truly spiritually present in a unique way in communion, where he sustains us and strengthens our faith in the grace in which we have received. And so all of these theological developments are beginning to shape within me, and shape how I'm viewing church, and shape how I'm viewing worship, and so on, and beginning to provide me with a much more consistent and sustainable walk with Christ than I'd ever been able to find before throughout the year and a half leading up to that, basically. And of course, these theological developments, my own personal development, maturation, was being shaped and impacting my dating relationship with my girlfriend, Grace. And of course, early on in the relationship, I don't know what I'm doing. In hindsight, I was probably too mature to be dating, and I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't really know how to lead a relationship well, but whoever's really prepared for anything in this life. But God has used this beautiful gift of dating, as difficult as it can be within a Christian context, to mature me, to make me honestly less selfish, because it feels like for the first time in my life, I'm responsible for someone other than myself. And she's not even my wife, and yet I still feel that burden, and a great burden of responsibility for another person. And I had to think about my life outside of the context of just me and God. And I actually had to think about what are the consequences of how I live my life, of how I spend my time, not just on me, but on this other person that I love. And so that began to shape me towards a more posture of humility, towards a posture of servitude, especially because she has such a heart of servitude that began to impact me in that manner. And it began to just to cause me to think more intentionally, not just about how I'm relating to her, how I'm loving her, and how I'm being with her, but then of course in my intentionality in all areas of my life. And so throughout junior year, and of course junior year just finished, so not like this was that long ago, I'm having major personal and theological developments occur at a rather rapid pace, right? I mean, over the course of 8.5, 9 months, all of this is occurring. But all of it is occurring for the better. And slowly but surely, I'm seeing myself progress more and more and more into the Christian that I was seeking and desiring to be, but I was struggling to be. And of course, this is not to say that it's been perfect, and even these past 9 months have not been without their pitfalls. Like, obviously, and of course they have. But how I'm addressing those pitfalls, how I'm addressing those struggles, how I'm relating to Christ and relating to his body, the church, it's happening in a much healthier and more profound and more sustainable way than I ever was before. And I think that's exactly how Christ intended for us to walk communally, corporately, to worship liturgically, to think intentionally. All of these things have developed through these different life circumstances and events that have occurred over the past 9 months. And it's really just been beautiful to witness. There's probably many more specifics I could get into. Like outside of that, the Bible study kept going. More conversations are occurring, meeting with a lot of people for coffee, being really good, trying to be a good leader and having great conversations with freshmen, with our freshman Bible study, people in our grade. We brought in the seniors to join our Bible study, which was very fruitful as well because they didn't have a Bible study. And so there are a lot of good areas in that as well outside of my own personal development where we got to see Christ continue to work with NSAE. Had 2 more worship nights, one in the fall, one in the spring. The one in the fall was huge, was a great success. We had maybe like 100 people, maybe more. It was a lot of people. And I thought it went really, really well, which was really exciting. And so, of course, the hope is that I don't think he will forsake his work, but every work that he begins, I believe he'll bring to completion. I think this work he's going to continue to work in going into the senior year. But I think that's the broad brush, personal, theological, just life development in general that has occurred over junior year, which it's been pretty awesome.
Yeah, trust me, it has been awesome to watch. And that's like not even all of it. That's what's crazy. Yeah, and I think one thing I encouraged you earlier, I'm like, just go get coffee with people when you can. Just take the random meeting, and it can become a lot, so you have to temper it, but take the random meeting and see where God takes you. And you've had time and time again that's been fruitful. And you have guys, I know, and girls, obviously, but seeking to you often. You know, you're at the frat house, it's a party, and they're fairly hammered, but they're still talking to you about, Wayne, I just want to find my faith, or I want what you have, or right. You hear it quite a bit, right?
Oh yeah,
yeah, which is interesting.
And it has happened the most when I'm out late at these parties or bill nights, whatever it is.
So let me ask you, because this is, I mean, you had a Saul to Paul moment to a degree. I mean, almost like the Damascus Road. You're walking on Armstrong and you hear the 3 word, you know what I'm saying? And the conversion was pretty rapid and quick. My instinct that's fairly rare, generally speaking. So, I mean, most people aren't going to have that. So I think, because it's a process, right? Like, would you agree with that? Like, and maybe they do have it. I don't know. Do you think like most of the people you're going to encounter and work with have that walking down Guadalupe and burning bush?
I'd say no. Most people won't. And that kind of goes back to the conversation about the normative versus non-normative or extra normative. So what I experienced was extra or non-normative.
Right.
Most people won't experience that. The normative experience of salvation is typically like just a prolonged process where maybe you were a believer early on, but you didn't truly believe, you just kind of said you did. And then through the course of talking with a variety of people and attending church here and there, et cetera, throughout months or years, you kind of wake up and you're like, I am a very different person than 3 years ago or 8 months ago, whenever that was. Like I can't pinpoint a time, but I can very much tell that I am. That's simply the normative means of salvation. The issue is, going back to what I was saying, people too often seek the extra normative, that they want what I had. And if they can't find it, they think they're insufficient or they're falling short or they're doing something wrong. It's like, it's called extra normative or non-normative. It's called exceptional for a reason, because it's an exception to the norm, right? So if it was not an exception to the norm, then it wouldn't be called exceptional, it would be called normative, And typically, we should seek the normative things, because that's what typically happens. If God permits an exceptional experience, praise God, that's incredible. But to seek the exceptional is going to leave you in a drought. It's going to leave you thinking you're falling short of something that you're incapable of attaining. But it's incapable to attain by your own strength, because it's something that the Spirit has to sovereignly permit. Short answer though, no, that is not the norm. The norm is typically just a prolonged process of growing and learning and developing, and then of course of time, you've very clearly changed from who you once were.
If you want a water, we have one right there, or you may have some. Okay. Yeah, I look back on that to your kind of Saul to Paul, and if you don't follow the Bible, Paul's one of the great disciples who basically had a moment where he was blinded, and he gave his life to Christ on a flash of light. So looking back at my own walk, I had put a lot of work in through the years. Like I'd tried to start a prayer group, still trying to go to church. So mine was just a continual process. Although I think everyone generally, unless you're just like born in the faith and you live there, and Jeff Warren would be kind of like that, right?
I know a lot of people like that.
But I think there are a lot of people that don't have maybe the Armstrong Parkway moment, but they have a breaking point. Or they're just, like for me, it was just like Doug Hudson, as I've referenced in every single podcast I've ever had. Like I just was at a breaking point of frustration, anger, not being a great husband to some degree. Like I just hit a wall, and then God found me. But I put so much work in that it was there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like you do in faith. This isn't about works, but you do have to chop some wood. Like lately I've been reading the Bible every night before I go to bed. Half the time I'm just open and start reading. But to me, that is putting some work in, so at least I'm just flooding myself with Scripture, right? So let's go back to something which is interesting. The frat thing, which, there's a lot of people, I have hundreds of listeners, or thousands on occasion, that look at the Greek system and roll their eyes, and I frankly get it. Looking back on, and I loved it, but looking back, there's a lot of bad behavior, like really bad behavior. But there is a mass importance of being an influence where you are, right? And I think that's what the RUF is so beautiful, and what's been beautiful for you, and even me, because I have people often ask, why are you like doing ministry in the Park Cities or at your country club? Well, those people need God, maybe often more. Right, because you might look at a frat guy and say, well, his family has money, or he's got all his needs meet. But that is, you're starving inside, and no one knows it, right? So you can go to, which we do, we can go to South Texas, we can go to Africa, we can go deep into the mission field in foreign countries, but there is a lot of work to do right here. I think that's missed often. That's why I love these campus ministries. Okay, I circled dating. So let's embarrass Grace. No, I'm kidding.
Yes.
Hello, Grace. We love you and love your parents, which is what's interesting because I'm good friends with her folks. We all went out last night, went to a concert. We don't need to get into the weeds of y'all's relationship, but that is it's in college. Everyone has girlfriends, boyfriends, and then it's like volatile. And what would be practical dating advice for somebody that comes into their faith, right? Like, I don't know what I'm not saying like what boundaries do you set, like, but
Yeah.
I don't know, basic practical advice. And then things y'all do together, because I know y'all, or you do a Bible study, or I guess you're doing a Bible study or devotional together, because you're going to have people that are coming to their faith and they're already dating.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you have to come to some agreement where, let's just be frank, you're going to work within biblical rules within the relationship, right? I don't know. Would you like to comment on navigating dating in college?
For sure. I've learned a lot, and mostly through failure, which happens throughout all of life, which is a blessing. One of the biggest things I will say about dating, whether you're coming into a dating relationship as Christians or you're already dating as Christians, or you weren't Christians and now you are Christians while dating, is that you are feet away from friendship and miles away from marriage. That your dating relationship should be far closer to a romantic friendship than it should be to a marriage. And I think we often get that flipped, that we think once you start dating, there's a big change. And now there's something different about how you'll relate to each other because you're dating. And you almost think it's like now you're like married, but you're not married. And that's the thing. And it's so easy once you start dating to allow yourself to cross emotional, psychological, and physical boundaries because you feel like you have this unity of soul and mind, but you don't because you haven't entered the covenant of marriage. And of course, that even took me and Grace time to figure out is like we need, like, this is a friendship right now. There's in the Bible, there's no such thing as dating. You're either married or you're not married. There's a brief period of courtship and engagement that occurs for those who are getting married. But even that period of engagement or courtship, whatever you want to call it, was very brief. That didn't happen for a long time before you got married. Dating literally did not exist for the majority of civilized human history. So a lot of it is a wisdom issue as well. I can't point to necessarily, here's a passage here and a passage here on what God says about dating, because it just simply did not exist at the time. But we can use biblical wisdom to guide us in how we should manage a dating relationship. And one of the big things is remember you aren't married, that there needs to be boundaries and not just physical boundaries, because everyone knows it should be, anyone who's a Christian knows about dating. Everyone, you hear left and right about physical boundaries, and they're incredibly important, but also emotional and psychological boundaries as well. Like there's levels of personal, emotional intimacy that you don't go down with your friends, whether they be boys or girls, and girls function a bit differently, but there really is, Or let's say you're in a purely platonic friendship with a girl and you're a guy, or vice versa. There are emotional and psychological boundaries towards intimacy that y'all innately put up because y'all know y'all aren't married. And this isn't just a Christian thing. This is really kind of an everybody thing, or a lot of people, not everybody. Some people cross those boundaries, unfortunately. Well, in dating, it's the exact same thing. You're far closer to a romantic friendship than you are to a marriage. And so these boundaries become incredibly important because we are called to walk holy and unblemished before the Lord. And again, that's not just a physical pursuit. That's an emotional and psychological pursuit. And so we should seek to sustain those God-given boundaries that preserve us from our own sin so that when, God willing, the day of marriage does come and you do get to conjoin each other and the father leaves his father and mother and becomes one with his wife, you get to enjoy the abolition of all those boundaries which were put up for your own sanctity, right? And that brings to mind something that's said in the book of James, where he refers to the law, right? So your 10 Commandments, the moral law, as the law of liberty, which is an interesting way to frame it, because we look at the law, we say, okay, this is what God says. We're not supposed to do that, and not supposed to do this, and not supposed to do that, and not supposed to do this. But James calls it the law of liberty because we're not framing it as what we can't do, but rather what God is setting us free from, right? The whole point of the law is to preserve us from the depths of depravity and consequences, eternal consequences, that will occur if we fall victim to not upholding the law. And of course, none of us uphold the law, and that's why Christ had to come. Point being, the whole point of the law was not just stop us from doing things, but to keep us away from falling into bad things, to preserve us from evil and preserve us in good. And I think that's the way we ought to look at dating boundaries, right? The multiple different kind of boundaries that you set up is that they're a beautiful gift to preserve you from the evil that can incur and could occur from pushing past those boundaries, and then preserve the beautiful gifts of the abolition of those boundaries that will be experienced when you're in a marital relationship, right? And another big thing is in dating, we seek to conjoin the emotions and the intellect and the flesh, but then, as we've talked about, you're not seeking to conjoin, the finances or the responsibilities or the time, So it's like, I kind of want these parts. I want to be married in A, B, and C, but we're not going to be married in X, Y, and Z. Well, then what's going to happen? You're dividing yourself, right? You're dividing both your minds towards these two different purposes of we're kind of married right here, but we're not married right here. Well, that's not how it works. You're either not married in all of it or you're married in all of it. And if you try to split the marriage mind and be like, I'm dating, but I'm going to be married in these ways and not married in this way, you're going to find each other divided. And what does that cause? Conflict. I think that's why you see so much harsh conflict in a lot of these like unhealthy, maybe non-Christian relationships. It's because they have their minds divided between being married, but not actually being married. And I think it's when you walk in the unity of purpose of either a romantic friendship that's not marriage or an actual marriage as ordained by God through an ordained priest or a pastor, whatever it is, that's where we get to see conflict preserved. Not that conflict. When I say conflict, every relationship will experience conflict. Obviously, me and Grace experience conflict. I'm talking about like this harsh back and forth, volatility that occurs in relationships. Like that's so avoidable if you seek that unity of mind as romantic friendship and dating. Then, of course, the unity of marriage in the covenant of marriage. And then the other big thing that I'll touch on is pursuing a Christian dating relationship is not just as some of the things you brought up, praying together or doing a Bible study together or talking about Jesus with each other. Those things are incredibly important. But one of the chief markers of a Christian dating relationship is, are you confessing your sins to one another? I don't mean all the sins that you do, but the sins that pertain to one another. I hurt you in this way, and I'm sorry about that. I'm going to take responsibility to work on this and grow from that. And then is your partner doing the same thing? Are you seeking to serve each other, to be there for one another, et cetera, et cetera? So it's this posture of humility and confession and then mutual growth that is actually one of the chief signs of a sustainable dating relationship. And if you have that, you can truly make it through any conflict, right? Not that you won't have conflict, but when conflict does arise, you can persevere through and overcome it. So I'd say that's kind of a hodgepodge of a lot of different stuff, but that's many of the things I've taken away from being in a Christian dating relationship.
Very good. And a lot of that stuff can apply to marriage. Anybody out there listening, I agree with that. God, that last part about confessing your sins, the way it affects your relationship. We need to do that more as couples, and I need to do that more as a husband. Extreme ownership, right? And that brings me this extreme ownership. Something that's always bothered me, and I've talked about it a lot. I talked about it a lot, especially when we were involved in the film The Heart of Man. Check it out if you haven't. It's a film on sexual brokenness that I was involved with. Is somewhere along the way in the past, I suspect it goes back to the 40s or 50s, this, guys will be guys and they're going to do what they're going to do. I mean, I have Christian men making jokes about their son. He's chasing tail. Somehow purity got pushed on women, and guys could do whatever they want. And it's really the girl's job to keep the guy from sexually going after her. And I'm like, why is that? Like, why does all the onus fall on the female for purity? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because guys do that. They're in college. They're going to, chase it. But that's some skewed Western, like, cowboy philosophy that's just wrong.
Yeah.
Right?
Of course.
You know what I'm talking about? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's the girl's job to say no.
Yeah.
Because the guy's going to come at you no matter. And I'm not talking like aggressive date rape stuff. I mean, the guy's just going to come after a girl, and it's her job to say no. And then this. How many relational mistakes are made based around alcohol? Most of them. A lot of them.
Yeah.
Tempers flare, guards go down. That applies to life in general, but I've just seen it time and time again.
Yeah.
And if you're out there, I mean, I want you to check it. Like I was in college, had some friends that had relationships that were so volatile. The fighting, the arguing, it was almost like this toxic, like bonding to each other.
Yeah.
Just kill it. Like, either fix it or just be done with it or take a break, because there's just no way to wake up 2 or 3 years through college, right?
Yeah.
Now, once you find Christ at the center, that stuff begins to be remedied.
Yeah.
Or get some help, frankly. I mean, you and I have talked, we talked a lot about your relationship, kind of in the early stages, questions. Seek out your parents, which may be hard for some of you, peers, books, pastors, anybody for relationship advice. Because you don't have, so I always say this, and I hope I've done a better job with you, but most men were given no tools when it comes to dating, really. My dad's amazing, but me and Papa did not talk about, here's how you date. Like, I saw the way he treated my mom opening doors and stuff, but no real dialogue ever about what does this all mean. So find somebody to talk to. Okay. I've got a couple other things. Do you have anything on your mind past that?
Well, we're cutting it to an hour, so.
Well, I'm going to go. We got a little time. You okay?
Yeah.
I know you got to be somewhere. So this was kind of on my mind. But we have a unique relationship. The parenting is tough, as you're going to discover someday. Hopefully you'll have that honor. It's awesome. But I think too many kids, I would just encourage them, your parents aren't bad people, right? And I used to say this to you guys, like I'm trying to do something or give you advice, and then there's pushback. And I'm like, look, this isn't some like conspiracy for me to ruin your life. Because I've told you, I will only say or do things for any of you guys that I think would improve your life. So I would just encourage kids out there, don't try to move from this adversarial. Now, a lot of parents are bad parents. That happens. It can be abusive verbally, neglect, absent, but give your parents a chance, right? I think most parents are trying to do a good job. And I think you might agree with this. I would encourage kids or young adults, go engage with them. You can come home the whole summer you're from college and just not talk to your parents. But you've done a really good job of engaging us in conversation, and that comes with spiritual maturity, I think, as well.
Yeah.
And it's biblical.
Honor your father and mother.
Yeah. It's one of the true commandments with
thou shalt not kill.
Thou shalt not kill.
Honor your father and mother. Right. So I'm on the same level.
What does it say? You'll have long days, or it's tied.
And your days shall be prosperous, or
correct.
something.
Yeah. Okay. So we are getting close to the end here. I do want to touch real briefly on a couple things, and we can move through this fast. I do think, I don't want to get into generational curses per se, but I want to just talk about how all y'all out there, parents, young adults, we have the opportunity to change the tide of family lineage and heritage and going forward, right? Does that make sense? So I think there is a place for looking into your past, your relationship with your father's relationship with his father, in anything from covenants that may have been made, things that were spoken over you. We don't want to get too deep into this because it'll, people get confused about Freemasons and all this stuff. But does that, I don't know. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah. I'd clarify one thing is when people think about generational curses, one, it's not like there's a little curse that was put over your family.
Yeah, right. This isn't like witches.
Yeah. And it's also, it is a spiritual thing, but it's not a spiritual thing in the sense that it occurred in the Old Testament. All curses have been broken in Christ. But there are real things like, hey, if alcoholism runs in your family and you grew up around an alcoholic father, there's a really serious chance you become an alcoholic. Or you grew up in a household where you're incredibly demeaned by a parent, or your parent would send you into chronic anxiety because of X, Y, and Z reason. Hey, there's a serious chance you're going to struggle with anxiety in the future, So there's real inherited mental health, physical issues that can occur that are in a sense generational curses, And you will maybe to an extent be shaped by them, but that doesn't mean they can't be broken. And I think they can be broken. And I think we notice generation to generation. I see it from my father to his parents. I've seen it from me to my own parents, how you can see like the issues that were promulgated generation to generation through your personal efforts and your efforts with community, of course, with Christ and his body, the church. Those issues that are promulgated from generation to generation can be fully decimated. Can be fully destroyed, but it will take effort. It will take intentionality. And it will take spiritual maturity. That's kind of all I have to say towards that.
Yeah. I think even just recognizing it, right? You know, Jeff Warren, I hope you listen to this, Pastor, because we love you so much. The first step to winning a battle is realizing you're in one, right? And I think we walk through this world a little blind to spiritual warfare, to pass the sins of the father is true to a degree, right? So like recognizing all that and then attacking it, and that can be through Christian counseling as well. And we should say this publicly, like, don't ever think of counseling as, that's for losers. I mean, the Bible's full of counseling, wise counsel, wisdom. Seek it out. Like seek wisdom like it's a ruby.
Yeah, they just didn't have people go to school for it, but it was counseling.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess that's to some extent, maybe the Jewish rabbis were counselors to a degree or whatever. So, well, they called Jesus the greatest counselor. So let's do this. Let's move towards closing. What do you think? I'm going to throw like just some names. So somebody is listed this. They're like, this is all intriguing. Let's not do 10, but what would you encourage somebody to watch, listen to, read? Like, and I'd say a bit of low hanging fruit. I mean, we can't throw, I mean, you could, but a 700-page book by Francis C. Like, what would you be? Some like, even YouTube stuff you love.
I'm a huge YouTube guy.
Yeah.
So I can toss out some good names. It depends on where you're coming from. Depends on what your background is. If you're Protestant, there's this guy named Gavin Ortland, who's a great guy, gives great theological work and pastoral work. He's probably my number one Protestant guy. Maybe if you come from a Roman Catholic background, it's kind of Council of Trent, another phenomenal resource that I like to use a lot. If you're coming from an Eastern Orthodox background, there's honestly so many different fathers that you can find on YouTube. Father Josiah, I'm forgetting a lot of their names. They pop up left and right. You could easily find them. I pull from all those resources, get a variety of backgrounds. Gavin Orton is my number one, definitely YouTube guy for theology and pastoral content. For more theology and church history kind of stuff, there's this guy named Redeemed Zoomer, and he's only like 24 probably. So, I mean, you take a lot of he says with a grain of salt, but he is very smart for his age and knows a lot for his age, and is doing some really good work. So I like watching his content. That's like for YouTube. For reading, I mean, any C.S. Lewis. I mean, start with the best ones: Mere Christianity, Screwtape Letters, The Great Divorce. I'm now trying to get into the patristics, so the church fathers. So a lot of stuff I haven't read, but I'm planning on reading. But maybe it's in your base. It's things like what I'm reading right now, Confessions by St. Augustine. A lot of Augustine's works are going to be really good because they're theological and pastoral. If you want to go more theological, you look into the Cappadocian Fathers, Alexander of Alexandria, Athanasius. He's not one of them, but he's adjacent to those circles. You go to Thomas Aquinas, Summa Theologica, which is like 13th century, 14th century, whatever it is. Good pastoral and theological work there. And it's hard for me to cite one. N.T. Wright's an incredible author to go to as well. Highly recommend N.T. Wright. There's a lot of good guys like N.T. Wright, your C.S. Lewis. Probably some names that are totally just leaving my mind right now. I mean, Augustine.
Okay, what's been the most meaningful book you've read that like brought you closer to clarity?
Oof.
Because the stuff you're reading now, you're in a much more mature place.
Yeah. Well, Confessions can be by St. Augustine can definitely be, some parts will be tough, but it can be read by, I'm really like Confessions is definitely up there, some of the best I've read. And this is also important to know. I only started reading Christian books very recently because when I first became a Christian, I made it a point not to read any book except the Bible because I'm like, I barely even read the Bible. I'm not going to go read some other books. So I haven't even read that many books. A lot of my reading repertoire came came from before I was a Christian, but I don't want to recommend any of those books. I really enjoyed Screwtape Letters and Mere Christianity. It makes sense. It's his like two best works, Christian works, but they really were like, give me a great perspective on what does the sin battle look like from the other side. And then Mere Christianity is like, what do I believe in? Why? You know, I'd say those are two of the best possible works for any Christian that's looking to get into a book. And then YouTube, Gavin Ortland, great guy. He's probably my number one recommendation for all issues.
Okay, so let me hop in. And I want to be a little more pop culture because it might resonate. So I think Wesley Huff is well worth following. I don't know where you stand on him.
Yeah, he's good too.
I mean, he's very good. Like Joe Rogan, Wesley Huff, it's worth the time. Yeah. I mean, look, we can say what we want. Bryce Crawford is a great place for somebody to get inspired and see that, like, just hear a testimony and, you know, like a young guy like that's more Instagram worthy. Personally, John Comer in this decade, just the past 5 to 10 years, has been a huge influence on my life. You know Comer.
Yeah, I consider mentioning him. I have a little bit of issues here and there, but for the most part, he does really good work.
Yeah, if you at least want to slow down, understand, well, that book, The Ruthless Elimination,
that one's incredible.
It just points out so much wrong with consumerism and materialism, and
I'm thinking more practicing the way, but yeah.
And then if you want to dig theologically over certain questions, I can't encourage enough to go to Dr. Jim Dennison's website, Jim Dennison for Truth and Culture. You can click on suicide, and he has 25 essays that he's written on suicide. You can click on any number of secular subjects, and he's written dossiers on them. So I highly encourage those. And you could get if you want to dig further on spiritual warfare, healing, deliverance. There is an old school guy named Derek Prince, who I believe is worth looking at from my standpoint. So, Wayne, a couple things. What verse do you just love to go back to?
Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 through 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight.
Mine would be Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans for a hope and a future. They're very similar, right? And memorizing scripture has been a struggle for me, but you don't ever give up. The last thing, the Bible. That's where it all starts. Getting in the Word. The Word is living, it is breathing, and it's hard sometimes. And that's why I encourage people, just read. Like, if you aren't going to understand it, you may understand half of it, but would you agree with that? Just start reading.
Yeah.
I do want to, this could go on forever, but I'm trying to give people tools, right? What book would you start with? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, you can't just go in the Old Testament. You can, but that would be encouraging and just give you, like, I don't know.
The first gospel that I always recommend is my favorite one is the book of John.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So start in John and then work your way from there.
Or if you want to jump around, if I give like one gospel, one epistle, one Old Testament, I'd go the gospel according to John, Romans, probably my favorite epistle, even though all of them are incredible. That one's might be my favorite. And then Old Testament, I'd have to either go Genesis or maybe like Ecclesiastes, one of those two.
Yeah, I love Ecclesiastes. Yeah, and I think, look, people, you're going to read some of this, and Wayne has a great perspective on, oh, this is all fake. And when you actually do your research, you realize it's not as fake as you sound. It's not like hyperbole or it's not, what is it, algo-worthy? It's not like, they're not just presenting something to get a point across that it's real, right? I just think that's important. That this isn't just like a book of tales to like build Christ. I mean, there's real historical context around all this.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we have AD and BC. I mean, like something happened really big, right? And I'd like to tell people, and I'm going to see if Caleb can cut a quote in here towards the end, or a 2-minute clip by Tim Keller another hero of mine. We should have brought up Keller,
Oh yeah, Tim Keller.
a modern day theologian who sadly has passed away, but not sadly it's at the right hand sitting with Jesus and in heaven. But if you, once you get to this point, if you believe that Jesus Christ died and was risen, then everything's just going to be okay. It's just going to be okay. Because we're going to be resurrected. The world's going to be resurrected. It's all going to be okay. Because there's people out there hurting. A neighbor right behind me has pancreatic cancer. There's health stuff. My father, your grandfather, in the hospital right now. But guess what? It's easy for me to say, but it's all going to be okay. All going to be okay. Because Jesus Christ died for our sins, was persecuted, and rose from the dead. Mm-hmm. So, death does not have the final word. Life does. And Wayne, with that, you have given me life. I guess Mom and I gave you life. I was a participant in that. But it's been a joy, and you're going to do great things in this world. And you're going to do great things with the help of God. And that's just where I'd like to leave it. People be inspired. Seek us out. Seek others out. That there is joy in the Lord.
It's beautiful.
What question would you like to leave for the next guest?
Oh gosh. Who has been, that you might talk about it. Maybe what's the most impactful book they've ever read?
Okay, that's a good one. Okay. So it'll be funny to see. I have no idea who I'm having on next, but I'd like to do somebody in 2 or 3 weeks. There is joy in the Lord. So, what we encourage is, again, do not suffer in silence. Do not suffer alone. There's a Lord that loves you. There are people that love you. And I just encourage you to keep looking up. Onward, my friends.